If you served aboard a long-distance warship in the 18th century, enemy cannonballs were rarely the greatest threat to your life. The most dangerous enemy on board was quiet, slow, and devastating. It was scurvy. During the Age of Sail, scurvy caused far more deaths on long oceanic voyages than enemy action. The disease didn't just cause fatigue. As the body's ability to synthesize collagen failed, connective tissue broke down. Old scars from years earlier split open. Gums swelled and bled until teeth loosened. Joint pain became debilitating, and internal hemorrhaging set in. During Commodore George Anson's circumnavigation between 1740 and 1744, out of roughly 1,800 men who set sail, over 1,000 died with scurvy, responsible for most of those losses long before reaching combat. Yet the most remarkable part of the story isn't the scale of the horror, it's that the British Royal Navy figured out how to bring scurvy under control, gained an operational advantage, and then accidentally ruined its own preventive system decades later, allowing competing theories to regain credibility among doctors who concluded the disease was actually caused by bad meat. To understand how a superpower solved a medical crisis and then confused itself all over again, you have to go back to a single British warship in the spring of 1747. In May 1747, a Scottish naval surgeon named Dr. James Lind was serving aboard HMS Salisbury as it patrolled the English Channel. Scurvy was breaking out among the crew, and Lind decided to run a controlled experiment that is now recognized as one of the earliest clinical trials in medical history. He selected 12 sailors suffering from similar stages of scurvy and placed them in the same berth. Every man ate the same basic ship rations, but Lind divided them into 6 pairs, giving each pair a different daily dietary supplement. The first pair received a quart of cider daily. The second pair took 25 drops of elixir of vitriola, diluted sulfuric acid solution 3 times a day. The third pair received 2 spoonfuls of vinegar 3 times a day. The fourth pair drank half a pint of seawater. The fifth pair received a paste of garlic, mustard seed, and horseradish. The final pair was given 2 oranges and 1 lemon every day. The results were swift. Within 6 days, when the supply of fruit ran out, the 2 sailors given citrus were making a dramatic recovery. One was deemed fit for duty, while the other was well enough to help care for the remaining sick. The sailors receiving sulfuric acid, vinegar, or seawater showed no meaningful improvement. You might expect Lind to have immediately demanded citrus fruit for every ship in the Navy. Lind recorded the citrus result clearly, but it occupied only a small place inside a much larger and more complicated theory. When he published his findings 6 years later in a 400-page treatise, he presented the citrus result alongside dozens of conflicting ideas, arguing that scurvy was primarily caused by blocked sweat and damp sea air. For 40 years after Lind's trial, thousands of sailors continued to suffer while naval medical authorities debated competing remedies. Part of the confusion came from the famous voyages of Captain James Cook. During his Pacific expeditions in the 1770s, Cook lost remarkably few men to scurvy. When he returned, the Admiralty asked him how he had achieved such a remarkable record. Cook praised a long list of measures: barrels of fermented sauerkraut, maltwort, portable soup cakes, and strict shipboard sanitation. Cook was right to enforce cleanliness and gather fresh food whenever his ships made landfall, but because Cook praised maltwort and sauerkraut alongside, cleanliness supplies that didn't spoil easily naval authorities spent decades buying malt preparations that proved unreliable as antiscorbutics while giving less priority to lemons. The real administrative breakthrough arrived in 1795, driven by a physician named Sir Gilbert Blane. Blane had served as physician to the fleet in the West Indies and had seen how rapidly lemon juice cured sick crews. He understood naval administration. Blane persuaded the Admiralty's Sick and Hurt Board to issue a mandatory order. Every sailor in the Royal Navy would receive 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice daily, mixed with sugar and their rum ration. The effect was profound. Hospital admissions for scurvy fell dramatically over the following years. At Hustler Hospital near Portsmouth, which had once treated hundreds of scorbutic sailors at a time, a visiting First Lord of the Admiralty reportedly could not find a single case in 1797, and only 2 cases were admitted during the final 4 years of the Napoleonic Wars. This was an operational advantage. During the Napoleonic Wars, British warships could maintain long blockades off French ports for months at a time without losing crews to incapacitating illness. Behind this success, however, lay a hidden vulnerability. Nobody actually understood why the juice worked. In 1795, chemistry had no concept of vitamins. Doctors assumed lemon juice worked because its natural acidity balanced bodily fluids or aided digestion. Because medical authorities believed acidity was the active mechanism, they assumed any sour citrus fruit would be equally effective. In the mid-19th century, the Royal Navy made an administrative shift. For decades, Britain had purchased its lemons from Sicily, but Sicilian lemons were expensive and required foreign trade agreements. Meanwhile, British commercial interests had developed lime plantations on the Caribbean island of Montserrat. Limes were cheaper, produced within the British Empire, and noticeably more sour than Sicilian lemons. The Admiralty gradually replaced Mediterranean lemons with West Indian limes across the fleet. It was during this mid-19th century transition, as British ships carried barrels of lime juice across global trade routes, that foreign sailors began calling British cruise lime juicers, a term that later evolved into the word limey. There was a critical biochemical problem that Victorian doctors could not see. Fresh lemons contain roughly 50 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams of fruit. Fresh limes naturally contain less than half that amount, but the main damage occurred during processing and storage. To preserve lime juice for long voyages, processing techniques often involved squeezing the fruit with mechanical presses, pumping the liquid through copper tubing, boiling it to reduce volume, and storing it in bottles exposed to light and oxygen. Ascorbic acid vitamin C is fragile. It degrades rapidly when exposed to heat, light, oxygen, and heavy metals like copper. By the time barrels of official Montserrat lime juice were loaded onto British ships, much of their vitamin C potency had been destroyed. The Navy was distributing a liquid that tasted sour, but offered far less reliable protection against scurvy. For years, the loss of potency went largely unnoticed because steamships shortened voyage times, allowing crews to eat fresh food at port before scurvy could develop. The problem surfaced dramatically during polar exploration. In 8, Sir George Nares commanded the British Arctic expedition. When man-hauling sledging parties set out across the ice, severe scurvy broke out, forcing an early retreat. A parliamentary inquiry in 1877 revealed that the sledging teams had left their heavy lime juice rations behind because of weight concerns and freezing temperatures. Outside the inquiry itself, the episode fed a broader uncertainty about whether lime juice could still be trusted. If ships carried lime juice and sailors still got sick, was citrus really the cure? As germ theory gained influence in late Victorian medicine, doctors proposed new hypotheses. Some medical figures argued that scurvy was not a dietary deficiency, but a form of ptomaine poisoning, a bacterial intoxication caused by tainted canned meat. Meanwhile, Sir Almroth Wright proposed a completely different explanation, that scurvy was caused by an acid intoxication of the blood. When Robert Falcon Scott led the Discovery Expedition in 1901 and the Terra Nova Expedition in 1910, his medical officers navigated this confused landscape. They inspected canned meat for bacterial contamination, hunted fresh seal meat, and still issued lime juicing, certain of which factor was the true defense. Scott's expeditions reflected the medical debate of their era, where fresh meat, sanitation, and lime juice were all used together without a clear understanding of which element was doing the real work. The confusion was finally resolved between 1928 and 1933. Hungarian biochemist Albert Szent-Györgyi isolated a compound he called hexuronic acid in 1928. In 1932, Szent-Györgyi and Joseph Srbely in Hungary identified hexuronic acid as the antiscorbutic factor, while Charles Glenn King's research group reached the same conclusion independently in the United States. In 1933, Szent-Györgyi and chemist Walter Harth officially proposed the name ascorbic acid. Researchers could finally explain the historical contradiction. Fresh Sicilian lemons had saved sailors in 1795 because they were rich in vitamin C. Later lime products contained much less vitamin C to begin with, and industrial heating or copper exposure degraded the vitamin further. When polar crews then omitted, froze, or inconsistently used those rations, the historical evidence looked utterly contradictory. The British Navy had indeed brought scurvy largely under control with its daily rations. But because no one knew what specific molecule was protecting the men, changing the fruit, processing the juice, and altering expedition habits made the protection increasingly unreliable, leaving sailors and scientists to navigate. Decades of medical confusion